very clear the agenda there is to make it sound like Jefferson not only fathered every one of Sally Hemings' children, but he was kind of just a slave-owning patriarchal ogre. And I don't think that that is valid based on all the writings that I've read of Jefferson. And I think that, truthfully, Monticello belongs to all of us because, as Americans, Jefferson belongs to all of us. He pens the words in the Declaration of Independence that we all follow.
Hmm.
And so he's relatable to everyone. And they seem to
Hmm.
make it all about Sally Hemings.
All right, welcome back to the Dean's List. We are joined by second year doctoral student and her PhD at Liberty University. Name is Linda Rose. I follow her on Substack. And if you're not following her on Substack, you should be following her on Substack. She writes beautiful things about history, and something she wrote a couple days ago caught my eye. She traveled to Charlottesville to film a project for a class she's taking at Liberty University. And while there, she she learned what some people think about Jefferson. And I can't wait. I just can't wait to hear the story. Linda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. So I guess give me the background, and you were kind of giving it to me earlier, and I interrupted you, but give it for the audience. Why were you at Charlottesville? What are you doing there? What are you involved? Why does it matter?
Yes, I'm a second year history PhD student at Liberty University, and I went to Monticello to do a project on Thomas Jefferson for my class. And I'm very interested in Jefferson. I'd like to write my dissertation on him. And I had never been to Monticello. So my family and I went a couple of weeks ago, and I was astounded at what is being said on the tour.
Okay.
And I will say that America needs to take Monticello back. We need to have good historians who are doing good, honest history, not biased history that is filled with ideology or political agendas. We need to have a reckoning because I don't think Monticello will last if it continues to go down the road that it's going on.
So let me ask you this. You're there and you're on this tour. Is it who's the tour guide? Is this somebody who's well versed in history, or do you think this is just someone who's been given some lines to read?
I felt like it was very scripted, but I will say that my tour guide was very young. She had just graduated with a bachelor's. She seems to be in her 20s. But it felt very scripted, the things she was saying, as if a script you would give to a salesperson or a telemarketer. And it felt very scripted. So I didn't ever say her name because I don't want her to bear the
Mhm.
brunt of this because I really feel like she's being controlled and she is allowed to say certain things and not allowed to say other things. And it's very clear the agenda there is to make it sound like Jefferson not only fathered every one of Sally Hemings' children, but he was kind of just a slave-owning patriarchal ogre. And I don't think that that is valid based on all the writings that I've read of Jefferson. And I think that, truthfully, Monticello belongs to all of us because, as Americans, Jefferson belongs to all of us. He pens the words in the Declaration of Independence that we all follow.
Hmm.
And so he's relatable to everyone. And they seem to
Hmm.
make it all about Sally Hemings. Jefferson not only fathered every one of Sally Hemings' children, but he was kind of just a slave-owning patriarchal ogre. And I don't think that that is valid based on all the writings that I've read of Jefferson. And I think that, truthfully, Monticello belongs to all of us because, as Americans, Jefferson belongs to all of us. He pens the words in the Declaration of Independence that we all follow.
Hmm.
And so he's relatable to everyone. And they seem
Hmm.
to make it all about Sally Hemings.
Hmm.
So,
So you're saying that you're on this tour, and you felt like the tour was about Sally Hemings as
yes.
opposed to Jefferson.
Well, they said a lot of stuff about Jefferson, but the way that, first of all, I did the hour and a half tour, which is, I believe, called Behind the Scenes, which you get to see every floor of Monticello. There is a tour that just does one level, and then believe there's a grounds tour. but it felt very scripted, and it felt like even though they were saying truthful things about Jefferson, the way that they were uh, just kind of peppered throughout the entire tour at different moments was to not let you focus on that, but to focus on what they were dropping on you like bombs. And the
Mm,
first bomb, which is really a bombshell of the tour, we're not even 10, 15 minutes into the tour. And the tour guide looked up at us and said, Thomas Jefferson took Sally to France and she got pregnant. Now, I was a little, first of all, I didn't say much because I did not want to interrupt her. And these people
mhm,
are paying more than $100 to hear what she's saying. And
mhm,
I'm only a second year student. So I didn't want to be arguing with her and making it an unpleasant experience. Also, I didn't have Jefferson's timeline in my head, even though I know a lot about him. And I knew that he took his daughter to France and he was
mhm,
there as a diplomat. So
mhm,
that's a lot different than he took Sally to France and she got pregnant. Now,
mhm,
so I came home and I did some serious research to make sure, because I do that often and I often look at it again because I want to be accurate in what I'm saying
mhm,
and what I'm writing on Substack. And it turns out that in 1784, he went to Italy with his daughter. He was in mourning because his wife had died. And he was very, very just inconsolable is the word that his friends and family use. And some of his friends suggested to get away from Monticello for a while. So he went to Italy with his daughter. And while he was in Italy, he was called upon to be a diplomat in France because Benjamin Franklin was now coming home. So he took his daughter, who was the oldest daughter, Martha, who they called
mhm,
Patsy when she was little, and they went to from Italy went to France. Once he was in France, he called for Sally Hemings and her older brother James to come meet them there, and that would be in 1787. So it was 3 years later that Sally had met with her brother, met Jefferson and his daughter in France. So to say that Jefferson took Sally to France and she got pregnant is totally not factual, but it's
mhm.
also designed to make it sound like he whisked her away on a secret tryst and accidentally impregnated her. Now, what's more alarming about this, if you look at the dates, Jefferson would have been 44 at this time and Sally 16. So I started to do more research about it. But when she said that, if we're talking about the tour specifically, it felt like the wind got sucked out of the room. It really felt like a bomb was dropped on us. And it was very alarming, as if, oh, there's no argument here. He took her to
Mhm,
France and she got pregnant. So we know not only is he the father of her first baby, he's the father of all babies after. Now,
mhm,
that's kind of the way that it kind of was trying to manipulate you to think when it wasn't even factually true that Jefferson first went to Italy and later on went to France and then called for Sally to come later. But in addition to all that, there is no historical evidence that Sally got pregnant in France, other than
mhm,
there's one of her youngest son, Madison, 50 years later, when he was around like 50 years after Jefferson died, started claiming that Sally's children are Jeffersons and that the first baby was conceived in France. But Sally never claimed that any of her children were Jeffersons.
mhm,
So that was one thing they said in the tour. On the other side, they said, well, Jefferson never denied it. Well, Sally never claimed any of her children to be Jeffersons.
mhm,
So now this was something that first came out years ago when in the early 90s when Clinton was found to be in an affair with Monica
mhm,
Lewinsky. And that's the
mhm.
first time this bomb was dropped, actually. And
Interesting.
and it was kind of like to say, oh, see, all politicians do this. It's not a big deal. But
Mhm,
actually, they destroyed a very good man to save a man that we know is a serial philanderer.
mhm,
And it was just an agenda of the media. But the man who did the DNA science said that no, the DNA does not link to Jefferson at all. It links to the Y chromosome in the male Jefferson line. So it could be any of the Jeffersons that were in Charlottesville at the time, or
mhm,
visiting Monticello at the time. There
mhm,
were, I believe, 40 males in Virginia at the time. Not all of them centered near Charlottesville, but I think upwards in the teens and 20s there were Jefferson males. But what we do know now is that Randolph Jefferson, which was his Thomas Jefferson's younger brother, he seemed to spend a lot of time socializing with the slaves. And it so happens that several of Sally Hemings' children were born in the time that Randolph happened to be a
Hmm.
widow. His
Hmm.
wife died. And within the time that he was widowed, Sally had a few children at Monticello. And then once he remarried, she stopped having children.
Hmm.
So that was something that, so finally, at towards the end of the tour, I was so frustrated. And I said to my tour guide, you do realize that the DNA doesn't link to Jefferson, it links to the Jefferson line. And she agreed with me.
Hmm.
So I was astounded that she knew that, but she was not telling the patrons at Monticello this. It's like hidden from them, which is terrible. So if they know that, they should give that information. If so, she went on to say that whenever Jefferson came back to Monticello, well, Sally would have a baby 9 months later. Well, that's a ridiculous accusation because whenever Thomas Jefferson came back to Monticello, all of his family would descend because they wanted to see him. There was constant traffic in Monticello. There was visitors of all kinds, not just family, but politicians and dignitaries and diplomats. And he would keep a record book of his visitors. So they look at that book and they say, well, see, there's nobody in his guest book at the time 9 months before Sally had those children, so they must be his. Now that is not how we conduct a trial
Hmm.
and evidence in our country. In fact, that is such flimsy evidence that you would never even get a grand jury to indict. You would never get to trial. A prosecutor wouldn't even bring that charge. It's such flimsy evidence. The fact is that Jefferson was intelligent enough to know if he was involved with Sally to put other people at Monticello at the time. He could just have put people in the book himself, the guest book. The fact that he didn't proves his innocence more than it proves his guilt to me. But then there's other problems. You would have to prove that he put List's family members as guests. Randolph was a frequent visitor. Did
Hmm.
he leave him off the guest book? Did he put him in sometimes? Did he put him in all the times? Did he forget sometimes? So that becomes impossible for historians to ascertain. So there's
Hmm.
no evidence on the guest book. And the fact is that you can't have a baby 9 months later every time Jefferson comes back because that's
Right.
not even biologically possible. And plus, you would have to prove that Sally never had her children early or late. So
Hmm.
I'm not sure exactly where that particular which particular historian came up with that, but I'm going to get to the bottom of that sooner or later. But I will like to tell all of your followers there is a book called The Jefferson Hemings Controversy Report of the Scholars Commission. It's edited by Robert F. Turner. You can get this on Amazon, but you can read this for free. It's a 400 page commission. It is on tjheritage.org. If you go into the different prompts they have there, you'll come upon this. You have to hit the link. It'll open up and you can read this for free. And this is written by historians, and there's other academics besides historians. There are historians that I recognize because I am studying at a high level in academia. So you would recognize some of the names if you are a history student. And they go into all the evidence, or I should say non-evidence,
Hmm. Hmm.
about Jefferson fathering any of the children. So here's what I found out, which is really alarming, is that only one child that we know of, which is the Eston, Eston, seems to have the Y Jefferson chromosome. So if you go on Wikipedia, they say all of Sally Hemings' children are Jeffersons, which is not, there's no DNA to prove that. And that is kind of how the Monticello tour is also posing it, which again, there's no evidence for that. So I would say that Americans should be aware of that commission and should read it. And
Hmm.
I would also like to point out, here's something just very interesting to me. There is a lab in Texas called Othram Labs, OTHRAM.com. You can go on and see the work they're doing. You can look them up on YouTube. They've been featured in many, many news programs because they have this cutting edge technology. It's a husband and wife team. And when they examine DNA, they examine hundreds of thousands of markers. Now, typical DNA at these low end labs are only maybe examining 20. Now,
Hmm.
I'm not sure what kind of DNA that we have from the early 1990s that have linked this to the Jefferson line, but I am going to point out, because I'm writing a huge letter to Monticello about what my experience was and asking for my money back. But in addition to that,
Excellent.
the truth of the matter is that the DNA is old, which
Hmm.
means it's outdated. So unless they're doing new DNA, their DNA is not valid. And now we have genealogists. If people are aware of, genealogists are using DNA and genealogy to solve old cold cases for police officers and
Hmm.
detectives. And so we can use genealogy. We can use the Othram labs to do cutting edge genealogy, cutting edge DNA, and really solve this problem once and for all. But I don't think that Monticello is much motivated to do that because they very much love the narrative that Jefferson was either, well, first it was he was raping a black woman. And this is why this history is so important. You cannot reinvent history with your political ideology because that was what the narrative was when this DNA first came out. Well, now the narrative is he's in love with a black woman and had a relationship with her his whole life, which of course there's no evidence of that. And there's only, as far as we know, on the old DNA, only one of the children of Sally Hemings have the Jefferson Y chromosome, which could have been any Jefferson. Of course, Randolph is our greatest suspect, but even on the evidence we have on Randolph, we couldn't get an indictment as well.
Okay,
So this evidence is
this is
suspect.
heartbreaking that
Yes, it is.
Monticello is um, carrying this narrative that they're going to beat this drum.
Yes,
And it sounds to me that they are doing this intentionally. Because listen, not every American is as well versed as you are in the life of Jefferson or even in history, period. And Americans want to come to Monticello and they want to learn about their president. They want to
yes.
learn about, about Jefferson. And they're being lied to.
Yes, they are. They are being lied to. And that's the big lie that they drop on you in the beginning to get you to believe all the lies that are told next. So when you walk in and they say, oh, Jefferson took Sally to France and got her pregnant, they're setting you up to for all the other manipulations that come afterward.
Wait. So you're saying there's more lies to follow?
Well, when I started questioning her, like I said, she was not telling us that the Y chromosome only links to the Jefferson line and not to Jefferson himself. Not
Sure.
until I questioned her did she admit that. So they're hiding that. Okay. Then they're saying that all her children were fathered by Jefferson when again, there's only evidence that one child had the Y chromosome. So
Hmm.
she obviously had children by more than one man, which they're hiding as well. If she did have a child at 16, which they're not saying because she was 16 when she first went to France, well,
Hmm.
then that would say that she's very confused in her person, her person as she's not making good life choices. So
Hmm.
they're trying to hide all that. So everything is being hidden and they drop that bomb when you come in. But it's more than that. They try to paint Sally as she is some kind of hero and Jefferson is being painted as some kind of villain. And Monticello is not going to last that way. It just won't.
Hmm.
And then, of course, they went on to, well, they did say also that because, well, this is coming from Madison, the youngest child. We don't have any historical evidence of it other than he said this and they wrote it in a newspaper way back when, 50 years after Jefferson died. But he's claiming that not only did she get pregnant in France, but Jefferson had promised her that all her children, she asked for her freedom and he wouldn't give it to her and but he promised all her children would be free. So they kind of had this narrative going at Monticello that he would not allow her to have freedom. And so I'm kind of like, you need to put some context to that because in that time, most women could not secure jobs and provide for themselves.
Hmm.
So he was responsible for her. So you're saying that a young slave girl who got pregnant in France, okay, who obviously probably can't read or write, and you want Jefferson to just set her free. She has no
Hmm.
husband to take care of her. Now Sally never married her entire life. So if she found a suitable husband, then it might have went differently,
Hmm.
but it appears that she was making bad life choices. The other problem is that they say that Sally and James wanted to stay in France because I don't know, they were saying they were getting paid in France because of the laws about slavery were different. So they're trying to pose it like, well, France didn't have slavery and we did. Well, France, they didn't need slaves because the poor were the slaves. That's why they had a violent revolution.
Hmm.
So they're on the precipice of a violent revolution. Well, Jefferson wouldn't have known it would have been violent, but he known there was a revolution coming, and he knew. I mean, he escaped Monticello at one point to go to his home in Poplar Forest, because the troops came into during the Revolutionary War. The troops came into the South, so he knew what could
Hmm.
happen during the revolution. And so they
Hmm.
posited like Jefferson's so terrible, he wouldn't leave Sally and James in France, even though they wanted to stay. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking they're about to go into a revolution. And he's bringing them back to a place that's safe where their
Right.
friends and family are. So you have to add a little more context to it.
Hmm.
That was the worst part. And then they went on to the woman thing with his daughter, which is another crazy thing. And I could talk about that if you'd like.
I want to ask you this. Actually, do you have time to hold over through a break?
Sure.
All right, let's pause here for a break because there's some other things I want to pick up on the other side. We're going to pause here and we will regroup with Linda Rose on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Dean's List on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I wanted to ask you this. We're talking about Sally Heming, we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, we're talking about the distortion that you were given on your tour, which you paid, by the way, to go on, and you
Yes.
paid to receive some distortion of facts. I'm interested because they're saying, Jefferson fathered her kids. How many children did she have,
Well,
roughly?
they believe five or six is generally recognized as six.
All right, and she never got married.
No,
And the DNA is inconclusive. It doesn't point to Jefferson directly, and,
no, it just points to the Y chromosome of the Jefferson family line.
and that's only even one child, right?
And only one child that, yes, that's what the commission is saying. The book that I encourage your readers to read is saying that the DNA connects only to the descendants of Eston.
Okay. And again, that book, that commission can be found at tjheritage.org. So if you're interested,
Yes.
you can find it at tjheritage.org. I'm interested. I'm going to go to tjheritage.org. I can't wait to read it.
There's
So,
also there's another great book before we go on. This one is by David
oh,
Barton, The Jefferson Lies. It was
yeah,
originally pulled, but it was republished. He does have a chapter on the Sally Hemings controversy, but he also goes into other misconceptions about Jefferson. So this is a very good book to have as a resource as well.
excellent. David Barton's one of our favorites, by the way. So you mentioned that this whole denial thing. Was Jefferson ever asked? Was he confronted? Hey, who are all these kids of Sally Heming?
He didn't write a lot about his personal life because he was so famous. And he got famous before the Declaration of Independence. Many don't know this, but his first work that was read in the colonies would be it's called Some Review of the Rights of British America. And it's a very
Hmm.
important, in fact, I have an article on my Substack called Thomas Jefferson, the Natural Rights King. And if your listeners are interested, you can learn a lot about Jefferson and his original documents. That would be one of them, where he tried to end the slave trade. He tried to emancipate the slaves. And then in his original Declaration of Independence, he tried to do that again. So when the declaration we know today was actually the fourth draft. There were three others before that, and the very first one was written by Jefferson alone.
Hmm.
The second, third, and fourth one, of course, Ben Franklin, John Adams, and also there was Livingston, and also I believe, yeah, I think, yeah, Livingston helped with that. So there were other people that helped him with it. They eventually took out the paragraph and the declaration on ending the slave trade and ending and emancipating the slaves, and probably because they felt that they needed to unite so that because King George would have looked at for any opportunity to divide the colonies against one another.
Hmm.
And thus, Ben Franklin's famous line, we must all hang together or we will most assuredly hang separately. So, but if they would have left that in there, I think it could have worked. because they could have just armed the slaves to fight with them.
Hmm.
But you know what? Hindsight is always 2020.
Sure, right. And so here we are. And I think it's important that people like you are willing to speak out in defense of him.
Right.
So
So to answer your question, though, I'm sorry, I
no,
got
you're
off the
okay.
topic. So he was very famous from some review.
Hmm.
That was read throughout the colonies, and he was catapulted to national fame right away. And then,
Hmm.
of course, he became very famous for the Declaration. He was the first Secretary of State under Washington. He was the governor of Virginia twice. He was also president for 2 terms. And he worked on many bills and laws in Virginia. So he basically, because I guess in that time he guarded his privacy. So he did not
Hmm.
write about a lot of personal things. He didn't write a lot about his faith, even though he said, I am a Christian. He didn't write a lot about the personal things that went on with his family or the slaves, which also he called his household or his family, which
Hmm.
people don't understand. He referred to his slaves as servants. He never called
Hmm.
them slaves. They also were all inherited. He never bought any of them. He
Hmm.
inherited most of them from his wife's family
Hmm.
and a little bit of them from his dad, but
Hmm.
mostly from his wife. So when we really start to look at Jefferson in context, a different picture emerges. But we have this way, we call it anachronism in history, where we take the value systems of today, we put it on people hundreds of years ago, and it doesn't work. It doesn't match. In fact, our value system today would probably appall a lot of the founders back then because their
Hmm.
values were very different than ours. And
Hmm.
so they painted him also as the patriarchy. And that they did that a lot with his daughter, which I could debunk everything they said, which I have done. I wrote an open letter that I'm going to post to Substack soon, describing my all the things that happened at Monticello under that tour guide, and debunking it with Jefferson's own words and with facts on history, and
Hmm.
calling them to redirect their script and to consult some good, credible historians that are honest and not ideologues. So
Hmm.
that'll be posting within the next couple of weeks. But to answer your question, no, Jefferson didn't talk a lot about it, but he did to his friends and family, of course, say this is ridiculous. And here's the most ridiculous part of all, which most people don't know. This myth originally started with a charlatan journalist who was an editor in Richmond. And he came here because he escaped the Scottish crown because of sedition, alleged sedition. And he wrote lies about the first 5 presidents
Hmm.
that we have. So this would be first Washington, then Adams, then Jefferson, then Madison and Monroe. So the first 5 presidents he wrote lies about, not just Jefferson. Now, Jefferson tried, because he was a freedom fighter, Jefferson did try to help him in the beginning. And he was imprisoned under the Sedition Acts, under Adams, which Jefferson did not agree with. So when Jefferson became president, he got rid of the Sedition Acts and allowed all these journalists and others who spoke against the government out of prison. And so, but during that time, Jefferson was supporting James Callender's family because he was imprisoned. And when he got out, he wanted to take the postmaster general job in Virginia, and Jefferson said no. He did not feel he had the character to have a job such as that would be overseeing things that had to do with the American people. He said, I will not give out positions as charity. He denied him that position, and right after Jefferson denied him that position, he wrote an article that there are children on Monticello that look like Jefferson when he never been to Monticello. So
Hmm.
this whole thing started out with a lie from a charlatan journalist who lied about our first 5 presidents, who posted this in a newspaper right after he was denied the postmaster general job by Jefferson. So all of this is very suspect. How is he credible at all?
Hmm.
He's not.
Hmm. This is interesting. I wasn't aware that it started with a journalist who was slighted, who felt who felt like maybe he had to get back at Jefferson.
Yes.
Um, but then it comes around full circle because uh, as as you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this on air or off air, but this kind of resurfaces in the 90s when we have a president who is clearly not of high moral character.
Yes. Yes, and that's why I believe that the media and the Democrat Party used the DNA to say, oh, all of Jefferson, all of Sally's children were Jeffersons, and they were trying to take your eyes off of the scandal that Clinton had with Monica Lewinsky. In other words, oh, politicians do this. And
Hmm.
so my position is they took a very moral man who really guarded his reputation, and they destroyed him. And actually, a founder, if you think about it, a founder of our country, the author of the
Hmm.
Declaration of Independence, who
Hmm.
means something for all
Hmm.
Americans that are going to be born, all of our posterity going forward. They took Jefferson, destroyed him to save a presidency of someone we know who is a serial, cheater on his wife. We know
Hmm.
this about him.
Hmm.
So it's just really disturbing that we would do that for political expediency. We should know
Hmm.
better as a country. We should protect our founding and our founders at all costs because they gave us what we have. The presidents today did not. The presidents that we have today did not create the country.
Hmm.
So we have to be very, very careful about protecting our founders and our founding and being honest about it.
Well, unfortunately, political expediency is the way it goes.
Yes.
There is a particular group of people that they just don't care. That, and again, I don't, I don't mind getting political here. The the Democrat Party for a long time found pride in the fact that they claimed their origins back to Jefferson.
Yes.
Uh,
Well,
you know,
that's,
he,
yeah, I could
you
debunk
know,
that as well.
uh, please do debunk it.
Okay, so Jefferson was a Whig Republican. And when you look at what there were Federalists and there were anti-Federalists. The Federalists
Hmm.
wanted a big, strong central government, which would not be big to us today. Ours
Hmm.
is so much bigger. But the Anti-Federalists wanted the power to stay mostly with the states. So Jefferson is not a big government guy like the Democrats. So now the party was called a Democratic Republican. There's a difference between a Democrat and Democratic. And that's what people get mixing. They mix it up. So today you'll hear people call the Democrat Party the Democratic Party. That is not correct. They're the Democrat Party. Their name is not Democratic. It's Democrat. There's a difference between a Democrat and Democratic. And so Jefferson was labeled as a Democratic Republican. And eventually they started calling themselves Whigs. And they called themselves Whigs up until Lincoln, when he would be the first now Republican. And he emancipated the slaves. But the first real Democrat would be Andrew Jackson. And that was
Thank
number
you. There it
seven.
is.
Okay.
Thank you.
So number seven, and he was the guy who did what? The Trail of Tears,
Yep.
right? Okay, so there you have it. Jefferson would not identify with the Democrat Party today. He probably wouldn't even much identify with the Republican Party because the Republican Party is also too big in their government. The government has been growing since then, and we're not really following the way our founders set up the Constitution. That's my
Hmm.
contention.
Well, that's a correct contention, and it's unfortunate. So I want to ask you this: you're in the middle of your PhD. I don't know, maybe not in the middle, but you're in it. You're in the throes of it. Um, do you do you foresee yourself? Um, I guess how do you see this playing out in terms of saving the Constitution, and also in terms of saving the reputation of Jefferson? Are you interested in going down this road with your dissertation, or what does that look like for you?
Yes, I do. I am interested in that. I think, well, I'm an educator. Most of my background is in education, and then theology, and then I went into history. So my contention is that we need to put back truth about our founders into the schools. Now, if they refuse, we need to educate our children differently, whether it's Christian schools, whether it's homeschooling. I homeschooled my son for a while. He was not learning anything in the public school that where I was living.
No, no.
There was also my contention is that I think the churches should supply schools. Now, in the beginning of our country, they did. The
Hmm.
churches were in charge of schooling. So when we look at the public schools in say New England, they were based on the Bible. I mean, the Bible and the classics were the main textbooks of the schools, and they were learning Latin, things like that. I'm not saying you have to do all that, but we have to put back the truth about our founders. Read their own words, read the letters that they wrote, read whatever they wrote. We don't even do that, and not even at the level that I'm at now. We don't have any class at Liberty where we're reading just the words of the founders. We need to do that. We need to
Hmm.
understand what they said and why they said it. And we
Hmm.
need to put that back in the schools from kindergarten to PhD. It'll be very hard to save our country if we're not doing that. So if the public refuses to do that because they have now bought into this narrative that our founders were just anti-women slave owners who killed all the Indians, took their land, if we're going to go down, if they want that in the schools, you're not going to have a country, in my
Hmm.
opinion. You're
No.
headed on a road where you're not going to have the country. We might not see it in my lifetime or your lifetime, but eventually we will see it. So my contention is always put the truth in the schools, read the founders' words, find out what they said and why they said it. Even if you don't agree with them, you need to know what they said and why they said it. And
Hmm.
so if we cannot do that in public schools, I think that churches should really have schools and actually pay for it from the church, not
Hmm.
from parents, because
Hmm.
parents cannot afford a Christian education for their children. Most of them cannot.
Hmm.
And so that is my contention. I know it's a sacrifice, but our country has made many sacrifices to do things like this before. In the
Hmm.
beginning of our country, it was mainly mothers that were teaching the children. Those schools were run by women, and there were a lot of them were homeschools where they would get together at someone's house and they had all their children, and a lot of it was homeschooling. So, I mean, the schoolmasters were only afforded by the rich.
Hmm.
So the middle class people, it was the moms that were educating the students, and
Hmm.
it was
Hmm.
homeschooling. But it was a biblical education. They were educated in the classics, and they knew about our founders. And I think we need to do that. That education is the most important thing. We
Hmm.
need to put it back in the schools, in the public schools, and we need to have Christian schools that are teaching it. I think that's the most important thing. As for Monticello, I think we need more of an outcry of Americans where they say, wait a second, Jefferson belongs to all of us.
Hmm.
He doesn't belong just to Sally Hemings' descendants.
Hmm.
Okay, he belongs to all of us. And we need to have truth here because we cannot just destroy this man's reputation and not even with facts, by the way,
Hmm.
manipulated
Hmm.
antidotes from history that have no bearing in facts, and then not just hiding from people the truth about the DNA and
Hmm.
all of this. You cannot continue to do that if you want Monticello to survive. So, first of all, let me say this, which was interesting on the tour. There were so many people there. Hundreds of people go through there a day. It is they kind of send you through like cattle. I mean, you're just she. In fact, my tour guide ran off right after it was finished because she had to pick up the next group. So
Hmm.
this is a fast paced. You're going through it quickly. There's hundreds of people, and in fact, my tour guide said that around July 4th, we have about 2,000 people a day. I also, it's right, wow. And I've also noticed that there was a lot of foreigners there, which means that they're lying to other people who come here from other
Hmm.
countries who are going to bring these lies back to their countries. So this is becoming serious. It's not just America, but these lies are brought back to the rest of the world.
Hmm.
And then they went on then they started harping on the woman thing. And Jefferson was very close with his oldest daughter. He only has two children that survived to adulthood. It was very sad. Him and his wife lost three, one in infancy and three that were a little bit older. And so two children survived to adulthood. One of them also died in her 20s. So Martha, his firstborn, he was very close to her his whole life, and he educated her highly. So this idea that our founders did not believe women could have education is just
Hmm.
ridiculous. So what they said, so they brought up three things about her to make him look like he was some patriarchal ogre. The first thing they said was about the alcove beds. Jefferson liked the alcove beds. He's seen them in France. And it's basically an alcove and your bed is tucked in there and you could put a curtain on it. I guess probably kept it warmer in there too because they had to have fireplaces. They didn't have heat like we had it. But he took 40 years to design Monticello. He worked and expanded it for 40 years. It was a long project for him and he loved it. He loved that hill. He grew up 2 miles from that hill, and he always said, I'm going to build a house there. And he did. By the time he was 26, he started building that home, and it took him 40 years. And so he had alcoves in every bedroom. And so Martha didn't want to have her bed in the alcove. She always wanted to move it out. So that didn't happen until, Well, this is how the tour guide posed it. How old do you think Martha was when she was allowed to move her bed out of the alcove? And so somebody said 16, and she's like 49. Okay, so now this is designed to make him look like he was this terrible patriarchal ogre who wouldn't even let her allow to have her bed where she wanted it. But
Mm.
just let's put some context. If she was 49, he was 78. Okay, so how many elderly people like change? Especially
Right.
somebody who built a house over 40 years. So
Right.
it took a little convincing for him to let her move her bed. So he's some patriarchal ogre. Is that the best example you can come up with? That he was patriarchal? Actually, you just proved that he wasn't, if that's your best example. The other example they used was that he made some comment to his daughter that childbirth is just like hitting your elbow. Now, obviously he was joking. Obviously he was joking. Men
Mhm.
today will make jokes like that, or they'll even say, like my brother said, when he saw his wife give birth, he came out of the delivery room and looked at his family, including me, and said, if men had babies, we'd be extinct. Okay? That was my brother's
Right.
rendition of childbirth. Okay. So Jefferson was clearly making a joke because all of his wife had her children there, and so did his daughter had 11 children there. He
Mhm.
obviously knew. So they used that to make it sound like he's slighting women in childbirth. And then they used another example that he made a comment to his daughter about her education would not be useful to be a farmer's wife. Now, that just is taken out of context to mean he didn't believe that it's good for women to be educated or that it was necessary. Now, he educated his daughter very highly, which they said, but they said that at another point in the
Mhm.
tour so they can
Mhm.
manipulate you to think what they want you to think as they take you to each room. But the fact was is that Thomas Jefferson loved farming. He believed that farmers are God's chosen people. He believed that as long as we don't have cities like London, we won't be corrupt because cities are corrupt. So he was
Mhm.
talking about farming. He wasn't talking
Mhm.
about female education. So you can
Mhm.
see how this gets manipulated to
Mhm.
make him a patriarchal ogre.
Yeah.
So
And they're
ridiculous.
and they're doing it on purpose.